Hi, I'm Lori Jones, President and CEO of Avocet Communications and host of STRATEGYFIRST. Join me and my guests, innovators, disruptors, and visionaries as we explore bold and brave marketing strategies that help you transform, scale, and grow your brand. I'm thrilled to have Caitlin Allen, Senior Vice President of Marketing for Simbe Robotics and a seasoned brand strategist as my guest on today's show. With experience in nonprofits, enterprise marketing, and leading early and growth stage startups, Caitlin is here to share the essential elements for scaling brands, messaging strategies, and the vital role of aligning marketing with revenue. Don't miss out on this engaging conversation that will supercharge your marketing strategy game. And check out the most recent issue of the STRATEGYFIRST newsletter on STRATEGYCast.com. Just like this episode, it's full of inspiration and a ton of ideas that will elevate your strategies and marketing know-how.
A competitive edge starts with strategy, and strategy starts with knowing how to develop one. STRATEGYCAST is a leading marketing podcast that serves up strategic insights, trends, and tips to help separate your business from the pack. Tune in weekly as host Lori Jones interviews bold marketing leaders who have priceless wisdom and are willing to share. Each episode explores cutting-edge approaches that have proven instrumental in transforming brands into industry trailblazers.
Welcome to the STRATEGYCAST, Strategic Marketing Insights with Caitlin Allen and Lori Jones today. Welcome to the show, Caitlin.
Thank you so much, Lori. I'm thrilled to be here.
I tell you, I am so excited to talk about I've got such a love for strategy. And to me, strategy is a key element to starting any type of marketing, sales enablement, whatever it might be. And you're going to share with us today some real key insights regarding scaling a brand. And you've done a lot of that with many brands. Before we get to those strategic insights, tell us a little bit more about your journey and what you're up to today.
Sure. So first, thank you again for having me, Lori. So excited to be here. I've been a listener for quite some time. And hi, everyone who's listening.
I love that.
In terms of my background, I think about it really in 4 phases. I've had about 20 years in my professional career. The first phase was in nonprofits when I was in PR and communications. Then I got into B2B enterprise marketing by accident, grew up as an entrepreneur of a small content marketing agency, working with companies like Marketo and LinkedIn on their thought leadership platforms. And then after I sold that business, I worked in venture capital for a few years, advising Andreessen Horowitz portfolio. And I would say I found my sweet spot the last 7 or 8 years leading early and growth stage marketing teams. And I just started a new role. Today is day 31.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it's my 5th startup. We just raised a Series B this summer.
That's wonderful. What is your passion when it comes to that entrepreneurial visionary mindset?
Such a good question. I think I'm really good at 3 things: story, strategy, and people. And what I love about earlier growth stage startups is you have a lot of vision and you need a lot of structure and process combined with amazing emotion-based storytelling.
Right.
To really create that vision. And obviously it's dependent as well on the people that you have around you. So for me, I think that's really what's fueling that passion, and that love is what's fueling where I've ended up in my career.
And, I love it. There's so many entrepreneurial run organizations out there that don't have marketing seats at the table. And they're several years into their lifespan and they still don't have marketing seats. They might hire, a graphic designer to make something that they need last minute. They just don't value it. When you are taking a look at working for organizations, obviously they're hiring a high level marketing title, a marketing individual. So that is out of the chute, an important clue. But what advice do you have for our listeners, the marketers listening today, and even the CEOs, those visionaries, disruptors, and innovators, when they go to hire that marketing team member on what they need to be looking for? That's totally off topic here, but I think it's an important point.
Yeah. I think a lot of it depends on where you are in your company life cycle and what kind of marketing you're trying to hire for, right? Like if and that depends a lot in your go-to-market motion. What I would say is not dependent on those things is chemistry between CEO and marketer. Like ideally, you want to be able to converse and regard each other in a peer-to-peer kind of way because the CMO, whatever the title is, and CEO need to mind meld. So I would say if you're the CEO, look at someone that you trust to mind meld with. What's probably going to, more structurally influence that kind of interpersonal chemistry and trust is experience in your company stage and or industry in the past. And then, marketing obviously has several different disciplines. I would say look for someone that has a superpower in the discipline you need, whether it's product marketing, brand, demand gen, or marketing ops. And then and be really honest about what that is. And also be really open to what you might not know, right? Like we
Surrounding
don't
yourself with
know the
smart
things we
people.
don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
today, of course, we're going to be talking about how this recipe that you've developed on scaling brands. Tell us a little bit. Give us a quick overview of that, if you will. But then there's some very important elements that must be completed prior to what we're really going to talk about today.
Yeah, and I know we're gonna get a little bit more into what has to happen before you scale a brand in just a moment. The actual process of scaling a brand is coming up with your strategy, the first principles, the story that you're going to tell that ultimately is kind of the first few stages in a conversation with your target stakeholders. And so that's what we'll go through today. Obviously, there's a good amount of foundational pre-work that you need to do to make sure that your brand is drawing the right concentric circles.
Right. And you use a process called the predictable pipeline that helps you understand, those key elements to, basically being able to launch and scale the brand. Would you give us a quick overview on that? And then we'll get into, those assumptions. You just can't go into the process we're going to talk about today without this pre-work.
Predictable pipeline process, there are 5 components of it. So the first one is that deciding your target market. So we're very familiar with that as marketers and probably CEOs. Who's your ideal customer? What's the buying committee map? Your personas, segmentation, things like that.
Right.
The second piece is messaging. So that's what your company messaging and positioning framework is. That's based a lot in competitive intelligence and customer input. And then all sorts of things, that feeds like persona messaging and editorial calendar and so on. And then the third piece is sales cycle, which is pretty self-explanatory. What
Right.
is your buyer's journey, your sales process, your final stage definitions? And then the final pieces, the fourth and the fifth, are resources and metrics. So resources obviously refers to people and your tech stack and your data requirements, things like that. And then metrics is how are you going to measure success in addition to the your hierarchy of reports and your main dashboard. So, there's a lot of work that goes into play into informing a brand strategy. And there's some overlap between the messaging component and the brand component, but you really need to make sure that you have that map, all 5 pillars, I guess is the best way to say that, of the predictable pipeline process before you're truly ready to think about brand.
Yeah, I love it. And one area that a lot of new brands fail in, and even brands, going after the Series A, Series B, even some Series Cs, is that they're not doing the research needed in order to, set the stage for them to be successful. So I love that you're not just skipping those steps. And here we're going to talk about, the brand messaging, brand strategy, and reframing the brand strategy through activation, demand, sales, or demand rather, and sales enablement. So,
Mhm.
listeners, there are a lot of shortcuts out there that people take. The shortcuts are not worth it because ultimately, you've got to be able to set the stage for success, and that research is vital. The number one reason companies fail is, besides money, is research. They're not doing
That
the
too.
research needed, and that goes way, way back. It could be product as well. I mean, do we have the right fit, product? But
Yeah.
nonetheless, those keys are really important here.
Yeah.
Let's dive into, or do you wanna respond to that?
Um, just really briefly, I think you said it really well. There's kind of this concept of what's gotten us here can't get us there. And
Right.
there's a point in an early stage part of a company life cycle where you're really like everything is a snowflake. And so you have to treat everything kind of as a one-off example. But at some point, you have to understand where there are trends that are going to fuel repeatability at scale.
Right.
And that's the moment where you have to shift gears to thinking about documenting process, documenting target persona. And really that's the moment to start thinking about brand, I think, is once you have that product market fit and you're starting to think about go to market.
I love it. A snowflake or a squirrel, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive into this process that you've deployed with many, many startups now, and give us a quick overview of it, and then again, we'll dive in.
Sure. So brand messaging is really there's four different outputs of it: vision statement, mission statement, elevator pitch, and the company messaging pillars. It fuels a lot of other outputs, which we'll talk about, that are more related to brand activations, demand generation, and then sales enablement. That's something I've been thinking a lot about in this current economic climate. Um, and we'll get into different pieces of that.
That's great. I love it. So with brand messaging, what we find all too often is that people are talking about what they do and how they do it. They're really not focused on number one, the problem that they're solving
Mhm.
or the benefit to the buyer. And so they go to market with messaging that is completely confusing. It doesn't differentiate, and there's nothing compelling about it. It's just, as we say, the sea of sameness.
Yes. And that's particularly problematic when you're in a new category that people don't even know exists or that they need to think about buying.
It absolutely is, and you have got, you've got this process that as you've
Mhm.
just stated, it's the vision statement, the mission statement, the elevator pitch, and the messaging pillars. I
Yep.
also have seen a lot of CEOs define a vision on their own, which is fine, but it has to be compelling enough and resonate enough from a cultural standpoint, and then be adaptable externally for the audience and tie into the product as well. Where are you seeing most mistakes made when it comes to that whole, mission, the MVV approach with mission, vision, and values?
Yeah, and you do highlight the CEO and a lot of the rest of the executive team, particularly product and sales and customer success, have a lot of input in this process that is hypercritical to the quality of the output. Before I answer your specific question, Lori, I might take a quick step back just to kind of set the stage on what brand storytelling is. Um, you know, I when I was young, I got caught stealing 75 cents worth of bath soaps at a local shop, and that was the moment where one, I learned you don't steal, but two, it was actually the moment that I started getting allowance because it led to a conversation with my parents about needing money. And
Oh,
it's one of those moments in my life that was very painful because I was mortified that I had done
wow.
something so bad. And, if we think about how we learn about the world as kids, right? It's through experiences like that or through things like fables and stories. Like I'm sure that you're familiar with The Boy Who Cried Wolf. We
Yeah.
all instinctively know like that the moral or the lesson of that story is to not lie, right? To not say something's true unless it actually is. And that's a long way of saying that brand messaging is effectively storytelling. Our brains remember stories 22 times more often than facts. And a story is basically just like setting, issue, and solution, or even more simply, like an as is to be kind of narrative. And so you brought up the kind of the leading with the problem is really important, provided that we do that in a way that's not to teacher student in
Right.
terms of like mortifying your listener. But to your question, so vision statement is first. A lot of them out there, in terms of mistakes CEOs make, they can be boring. They're opaque. We can't remember them if our life depended on them. Maybe because like there are so many words out there like leverage and optimize and maximize and such long vision
Innovate.
statements that they're just not memorable. Exactly.
Right. Right.
So I would say that's thing one with the vision. The other common mistake I see with vision statements is that they're actually not thinking big enough. And that goes back to my point of what got us here can't get us there. Like in my current category right now, the market has been thinking about shelf intelligence. How do you make the shelves inside the stores intelligent? But if we ask the bigger question of what is the problem that we're really solving, it's actually much more related to the store and the ecosystem. And I'm not going to kind of give away our category strategy, but you have to think bigger.
Right.
And then the words that we use are often not compelling, not evocative, that create a very clear image of what the desired future state is in as few words as possible. And
I'm going to give you
go
a
ahead.
great example, and it's our vision statement. We developed this 18 years ago for the agency. It could be 20 years ago. Was it pre-kids or not? I cannot remember. But nonetheless, it is stood the test of time, and that's the goal also. Our vision statement is in demand, 2 words. When you hear those 2 words, in demand, you know exactly where we're going. It is very futuristic. We want to be in demand, and guess what? We become in demand by making our clients in demand as well. That's what
Yes.
marketing is all about, right? And that outcome-based approach to it can really create that imagery and that sense of belonging when we're working with our clients and when we're hiring as well.
It's so well said. And I think, what you just alluded to is the vision is kind of timeless, right?
Right.
There's not a time-based nature to it. The mission statement, of course, is then how we build towards the vision. And that changes. Like, if you've been around, your agency's been around for 20 years, I'm sure the tactics are different than they were 15 years ago or 10 years ago.
Right.
And so that's like, those are the 2 delineations between those things that people often conflate. But I think the things that are the most important, where I see CEOs and their marketing peers sometimes messing up, is actually more related to the elevator pitch and the company messaging.
I
Like
agree.
the elevator pitch, think about the social anxiety that, like, I'll speak for myself. I get social anxiety when someone asks me where I work and I don't know how to answer.
Right.
Right. And so I think an elevator pitch it's a couple sentences that answers really quick questions of why a certain problem exists because of an approach, a status quo approach. And then also how your business solves the problem differently in a way that creates new benefits for the users. That's it simply. And it needs to be something that literally you can memorize in like 25 to 50 words.
And it can't be we were in a session, recently with a client, and they hired, um, a very an outsourced CMO group, to help develop a bunch of these, deliverables, and
Mhm.
I was so disappointed in the result, because it was all about me, 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 the
Yeah.
company, the company, the company. And, it wasn't about the outcome, and I think that is such a fatal flaw in a lot of what we see in the market today, and we refer to it at Avocet, it's the difference between telling a story, back to strategic storytelling, and selling a story. Marketing can tell a story that is very provocative, and very memorable, and very emotional while selling. Because you're creating those feelings, those positive feelings, those aha moments, which is what we want to do, versus simply
Mhm.
just telling a story and expecting people to adapt to it.
Well, and it's particularly common with technical founders, and it's
Yes.
very understandable because you spend all day thinking about the new amazing technology you're making, so of course you wanna talk about it.
Mhm.
That's understandable. However, to your point, that if you don't answer the 4 questions that buyers have in the order that they have them, you won't create a buying vision, and those 4 questions are, "Do I have a problem? Do I need a solution? Do I need your solution? And then do I need your solution right now?"
Yeah.
And, getting people to self-guide down that buying journey is really about creating 2 things, and I call them FOMO and FOMU. FOMO, we all know, fear of
Right.
missing out, and then FOMU is fear of messing up. Like, if we're pitching new technology and, and there's some amazing proof points that customers are getting from using the technology, that creates FOMO. But then the next kind of like following emotion is, oh God, I don't know how to do this new thing. And
Right.
so that's where we have to give our prospects things like role models and crawl, walk, run blueprints and community and things along those lines. So it's crystal clear about how they can transform their status quo into a new approach and a new set of benefits.
Yeah, you don't want to set them up to fail without providing them the tools that they need to succeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it happens a lot. Message pillars is something near and dear to our heart, and it
Mhm.
helps again keep everyone on the same sheet of music, whether it be an internal usage and then development of one externally as well.
Yep.
Walk us through your process on that.
Yeah. So messaging pillars are effectively the main tent poles of a company's overarching value prop. And in terms of so I would say in my opinion, company messaging, once it's defined, it then feeds solution, product, and persona messaging. And that's the key connection point that we'll talk about later, between product and brand and how really in some ways they're actually the same thing, in my opinion. Um, the process for creating messaging pillars, in terms of the output, you want to be able to have a message that you can repeat as much as buyers need to hear before they believe it. And usually that's about 13 times, right?
Mhm.
And to do that, to make the claims that are believable for your prospect and your buyer, you have to have what I call third party proof, whether that's analyst reports, proprietary data, customer case studies, all of those things. And so my process is actually to really root myself in one, the personas, two, the product strategy, and then three, discerning through competitive intelligence and customer interviews, what are our crucial differentiators and differentiated customer outcomes? And then I soft circle three of them, and then I work upwards, so to speak. Like I start with the proof point or the differentiation, and then I work upwards to discerning what the message is in a way that articulates the outcome and the value for the buyer.
And it's interesting when we are navigating our research when it comes to differentiation. We developed a tool years ago that takes a look at the point of parity and the point of differentiation. Because
Ooh.
when you are in a session like this and really planning, everyone comes to the table with the table stakes, which are the points of parity. And, for a quick overview here, for a retail environment, because it's really easy right now, for us to explain during the show, a point of parity might be that they're open from 9 to 5. A point of parity might be that they're open with, or either at the minute you enter the door, the building smells nice. It might be
Mhm.
that you're greeted with a smile. Those are table stakes. A point of differentiation might be during the season, you can open up at 6 a.m. and close at 9 p.m. to provide more shopping hours with daylight. It's those sort of things, people miss. And when you go to market with your points of parity, you're going to sound, again, bringing up the sea of sameness, you're going to sound and look like everyone else in the market. And that causes confusion when it comes to making a buying decision. There's
It's so
no
well said.
excitement.
Yeah, no, it's so well said. And I think too, like it's easy for us as business leaders to think we know what the points of differentiation are because, maybe we focus on where we put our own emphasis. But actually staying connected with the state of the market, right? The customer intelligence, the competitive landscape, what we're hearing from our customers, things that we're learning if we're in B2B from our pipeline trends and our campaigns and things like that. That's really what should be the basis for it, and it changes over time. Like, the company that I'm at, like, has had in the past the world's leading computer vision robot,
Mm,
right? And that's still part of our differentiation mix, but it actually is showing up differently in the market now in a way that's around intelligence and insights
right.
because the market has fast followed, right? So now everybody's trying to have robots, and so you really have to be open to that changing too.
The messaging is such a critical point. It is what leads the graphic element. It's what leads creative. It's what leads the strategy. It leads, your owned and shared paid approach, right? It leads every piece of that. But so many people end up just jumping right over it and going into tactics. What advice do you have for people listening today on the importance of this step?
That's a very good question. I think a lot of it comes back to what creates trust with a buyer, which is consistency and repetition.
Right.
And then that kind of pain to gain trajectory that we're talking about of, identifying the problem before the solution. Without an underlying strategy that defines who you are and how you operate, then how you show up as a brand and your tactics is going to feel disjointed and it's going to alienate a buyer. And that's not something people generally like consciously know, but subconsciously we definitely do.
Yeah, I love that. That is a really important piece of wisdom right there. Thank you for that. Next, we're going to move into brand strategy. And seemingly, this feels a little bit backwards. But knowing
Mhm.
that we've got, all the strategy work up front, we're moving into messaging, then we go into what you refer to as brand strategy.
Yeah. So, brand, in my opinion, is not any specific marketing discipline. In some ways, it actually feels like it umbrellas everything. And I think about it through the lens of four different concentric circles. There's the company where there's brand strategy needs to touch, and that's everything from, your employees, your executives, your board, your stakeholders, those kind of things. Then there's your customer. That's the second concentric circle. Then there's your community. And then there's your category, and category can include people like analysts, influencers, and competitors and things. And so a brand strategy needs to span all four of those circles. And that's why I really base brand strategy a lot on first principles. So things like owning the problem, creating relief, really, really grounding my company in what's going to make us stand out to the buyer and then how we're going to stand out to the buyer. And, I'm sure people know about the phrase from Zig Ziglar that logic tells, emotion sells. And so brand strategy is really for me rooted in how we make people feel relative to the problem that we solve. And then in terms of how it shows up in the world, it takes the shape of every touch point integrated campaign that we have. And so I often root a lot in the design principles that our product team has had originally, because usually that's really a good guide. And then the second is our customer interviews. Like, what are they telling me that we are the problems that we solve for them, and then that's often what roots things. And maybe one quick example, I'm a member of the CMO coffee chat, and I actually already referred to Heinz Marketing in this conversation. Heinz Marketing and Sixth Sense are both sponsors of the CMO coffee chat, and I meet every Friday with a group of CMOs to, talk about best practices in dumpster fires in a safe environment. And that I've been part of that group for 3 years, I think, and I've never really needed a technology that Sixth Sense sells or
Mhm.
the kind of work that Heinz Marketing offers in terms of projects until the last couple of months. And I can tell you who are the first 2 companies that came to mind because they've been so helpful to me in a way that, like, solves my problems on a day-to-day as a marketing leader. And I love that example because it like the CMO coffee chat, they don't charge for it. There's no pitching about their product ever, but I know who they are because they're helping me and they're telling me how they work and so on.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, that's how you really talk about thought leadership, right? That's a
Yeah.
great example of thought leadership. From a brand strategy standpoint, what's a failure point here that people should be aware of? What we see quite often when we enter whether it be an enterprise brand and we are going into, entering through the doors to instill some more strategic practice, or a startup or early stage company, one of the failure points that we see is, people reading a book and saying, about brand strategy, and they get done with it and they use one of the brand strategies that was, talked about in the book, instead of really customizing what they know they should be doing for the brand. They're not putting in the hard work to get to the point that they can be successful from.
Mhm. Mhm. I think that's a really good one. And it's probably what I would have highlighted. In addition, what I'll call out is mm, when you're putting together a brand strategy, you need to mentally divorce yourself from your buyers and your product proof points.
Mhm.
Like I often see too much of a connection between brand and product strategy, and there needs to be kind of a church and state separation. Obviously, there's a handoff, but if you talk too much about as a brand about how X title that you need to talk to struggles with this problem,
Right.
it kind of defeats the point.
So, what is the soft underbelly with that handoff? I mean, I think that is, we're talking about MQLs and SQLs, really.
Yeah.
I mean, and that handoff is that, and there's so much friction in organizations between sales and marketing with that gray area in between.
There is. Um, I think what comes to mind for me is having clarity and executive alignment around the three marketing horizons, as well as the metrics you're going to use to measure them. And what I mean by that is, there's the marketing horizon we know as customer marketing. Or I guess there's four marketing horizons, sorry, not three. Customer marketing is kind of today or yesterday, right?
Right.
And that those are based on metrics of, references and customer lifetime value and renewal and churn and all that kind of thing. The second marketing horizon is demand gen, which depending upon your sales cycle length might be a quarter out, it might be in month, it might be 6 to 18 months out, but it's effectively pipeline and closed won. And then the other two, and companies always measure customer marketing and demand gen. Those two horizons are always factored in. The marketing horizons that often aren't as much, particularly in an early stage environment, is brand, which goes anywhere from 6 months to 2 years,
Mhm.
and that thought leadership, which can go up to 5.
Yeah.
And the metrics that I often look at for those are much more related to website traffic, search term growth, share of voice, analyst endorsement, things along those lines. And I'll be the first to say that they are not going to matter as much to your board. They're not going to matter as much to your CEO. So how much you monitor them and talk about them and prioritize them, sometimes it's smart to just not do that very much with people external to marketing unless you have a really great CEO peer. But you sure as goodness are going to be in a problem with your board or your CEO in 2 or 3 years if you haven't put in that work and that monitoring on those kind of tier two success metrics today.
Yeah, that would be a completely additional show on, the board seats that CMOs are not taking anymore, or not being offered anymore. And a lot of it has to do with the mindset of metrics that are just not achievable. They back in metrics to achieve a revenue goal, versus providing the budgets that are needed and the resources that enable you to meet the revenue goal from a marketing standpoint. So I think that there's a lot of areas where people are set up to fail there, and it's a real disappointment for marketers today. I know. Um, okay, so now we're going to move into the third phase here, which ties into the growth side of all of that, and really how you execute it and reframe the brand strategy for that activation, the demand, and sales enablement.
Yeah. So a lot of this started from a fairly self-serving place because I work in early and growth stage companies where budget is often tight, headcount is often less than you want. And we're in the macroeconomic season that we are, which is, there's a lot of pressure on the demand gen side of things. But I also know that I need to invest in things like brand if I'm going to continue to empower my organization to, to triple, triple, double, double. Um, so I have been reframing brand strategy first in my own mind, and then second within the companies that I've been a part of in three pillars. The first is activations, brand activations, and that spans things like, how you communicate with customers, social events, maybe even like delight programs. The second bucket is demand gen campaigns, which depending upon your go-to-market model might be one to many, it might be one to few, it might be one to one.
Right.
And then the third piece is sales enablement. Like, what is the content and the training that you're giving your sales team? And what I'm loving about it, not from from a self-serving perspective, but what I'm starting to see be really great for my organization with that approach is it fuels such amazing alignment, and it really sets us all up to deliver that message consistency to the market, because we're all grounding our disciplines in identify customer pain, help transform that to a buying vision, and then provide proof that you can actually do the thing that you hope you can do.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I think the one part that people struggle with is the demand gen.
Mm.
And really understanding how they are going to funnel people through the channel or channels to really create the activations or the quality leads that sales is looking for. What advice do you have for people? It's a real struggle point.
Yeah, it is. And I would say scalable storytelling depends on that going well.
Mhm.
And the kind of mind or the kind of skill set, maybe better said, that fuels excellent demand gen is different than what fuels brand excellence. For brand excellence, the story trajectory is crucial. For demand gen to work, there's kind of two different buckets. One is you need to map out your content and have that align with your buyer journey and your persona journeys. And the content needs to be specialized by use case and messaging pillar specific to each persona. And you need to make sure you have necessary assets for every stage of the funnel. So that's the content side of it. The other part of demand gen, and I think, in early stage environment, this is often both of these pieces I see common failure points, but you need to get super granular on, okay, if we need to create X number of sales accepted leads or sales qualified leads, then the kind of upstream marketing qualified leads, creating a demand plan where you make assumptions of we're going to get 100 of those marketing qualified leads or sales accepted accounts from this webinar and then that ebook and that buy, and being that specific about what you like, basically setting up the architecture of your own
Right.
success. Um, and then the last thing I'll say is the connection point between the two is I see companies not knowing how to effectively repurpose very well,
Right.
which is where you get a lot of the life from your content assets, right? So I'll often, like my team right now, we're going to be creating a definitive guide all year, which I've outlined. But as we create it, it's going to show up in different assets itself, and then it will be wrapped up into that master asset at the end of the year. But
Yeah.
every piece, like every blog, for instance, maybe not every blog, but a lot of blogs can then become a webinar. And
Right.
then, once you have a certain set of assets around a particular topic, you can create a pillar page. There's a very choreographed kind of linear way that you can repurpose content, whether it's going from the bottom of the funnel up to the top or the inverse, that companies need to honestly just slow down and develop a content repurposing strategy.
I agree. We refer to it as hub and spoke. So
Mm.
at the hub is your guide. And then the spoke can be LinkedIn, it can be webinar, it can be social content, and can be a thought leader quote. It can be an email campaign, it can be an ad, it can be a landing page, all these different things that repurpose it. We actually internally had a campaign last year. We took a look at all of our content, and we're still writing a lot of content, but the team affectionately called this tsunami, by the way, because we had so much content. It was a matter of looking at it more effectively and efficiently and tying it into quarterly initiatives and repurposing things so that we could extend the lifespan of all that great content and not just push it out at one time. So,
Yeah, I love that.
yeah, we deployed Tsunami last year. The other thing that I think is really interesting at this stage of the funnel, if you will, is really determining if you are going to market, uh, you know, copy aside, knowing that what you're going to market with is truly beneficial from a messaging standpoint. We're really hitting in on those emotional epiphanies. But are we going to market with the application that our solution or product delivers, or
Mm.
multiple applications? Or are we going to market with an industry focus on the problems we solve and then application. And there is a lot of testing, we believe, that needs to be done with that.
Yes, I would 100% agree. And it's really difficult if you're at a company where you don't have good proof points. So
Right.
that's another lens that really can be influential. Um, and I think a lot of that again, comes from where maybe how your product was born. Like the company I'm at was specifically developed at first for grocery.
Mhm.
Now we're expanding to retail, right? So there's a very industry specific narrative there. For
Right.
other B2B tech, there's not. And and
Oh,
and
broad. And, are
sometimes you're
people
too broad.
buying are they buying the application or they buy the result, but are they looking for the application, then the result, or are they looking for someone with the industry experience, then the application? Marketing firms are a great example here. Do people shop for PR or do they
Mhm.
shop for an aerospace agency? It's a toss up.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I don't think there's an easy answer. It's kind of like a chicken
Oh,
and an egg question.
well, it is. It is. It is. What we are finding is that people, first of all, say, "Okay, gosh, I need someone to solve this problem." And by the way, if they have aerospace experience, that's icing on the cake. Um,
Yeah.
but it is totally different for a lot of. It is so different. If you take a look at the SaaS world, you've got to lead with the solution that you're the problem that you're solving with the application and then move into ultimately although a lot of them are industry agnostic anyways, so it's that innate you're serving one industry, but some of the broader SaaS companies, it can be a real difficult problem to solve.
Yeah. Yeah.
Think
And
about
quite a
QuickBooks.
large team if you're going to go about it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very interesting. So we've talked about so much today, and incredible insights regarding the messaging and the strategy that backs it up, and then really how you can and should execute. Can you provide
Mhm.
us an example of either a brand out in the market right now or a brand that you've worked on that has deployed this, and some of the insights that you learned along the way, the problems that you solved, and then, of course, the output, what you gained through it.
Yeah, so the one that's coming to mind is I worked at a company called Happy Returns, which, if you've ever, basically it's a return solution that retailers can purchase and offer to their shoppers that was really rooted in the idea that returns are awful. They're annoying and clunky, and you have to get out your packaging tape and your printer and your cardboard and your scissors and all that kind of stuff. Much of which, like most millennials, don't even have a printer. And then once you box it all up, you have to then go to a UPS on your weekend, and you just basically spend every weekend going to some kind of UPS or FedEx and dropping off your package. And so the solution provides a sustainable means for the retailers to collect product. It also gives a way for shoppers just to drop off product without the actual box itself,
Right.
and skip all of the annoying logistics, so to speak.
The fight with
What?
tape,
Say that again.
and the fight with the tape, the
And the
tape
fight with the tape,
dispenser.
exactly, or the printer ink that you don't have.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, what we realized in the brand story process, Lori, was that shoppers were really aware of the problem related to returns, but retailers were really afraid to acknowledge that it existed
Oh,
because returns are such a suck on retail profitability.
right.
And so as we
So they
got
want
into
to make it
the
hard.
they did. No, they
Yeah,
did. And they,
yeah.
they purposely were hiding it in their websites. And the last thing they wanted to do was to make returns easy because they were afraid they were going to just lose more money. What we ended up doing was deciding to highlight part of our product in our brand story around exchanges, because there was like a suggested exchange portion of the flow where you could suggest based upon the return reason a new product. And so we ended up having a narrative around basically converting returns into a moment of opportunity to keep more revenue and to delight your customer with a personalized experience.
I like that.
And that was a really big game changer in terms of the narrative that we told. And so I think that's probably a simple example of like a lot of it is just inverting. A lot of a brand story is just inverting your lens to understand your buyer's lens.
Well, and I think one of the key points that you bring up here is simplicity.
Mhm.
And it is really easy for, I think, product teams in particular to overcomplicate the message or the process. And in this situation, it was so simplified and it was easy to communicate. And it delighted, to bring up a term you brought up earlier, the customer almost immediately. It created that attraction
Yeah.
and positive results. That's great. Well, I tell you, this has been a fabulous conversation today. I really appreciate it. Any final pearls of wisdom for our audience today as they navigate a lot of what we've talked about today?
Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed this and
But
no surprise there. I think just given the audience of the CEO or executive audience for this podcast, my final parting, just maybe lesson learned through lots of failure in my career, falling up, um, is to think about supporting your marketing leader in being part of not just a revenue trifecta, but also to work hip and hip with the rev ops person and the head of people. And what I mean by that is, marketing is effectively their job is to listen and synthesize all the things that product sales and customer success and customer support know and kind of are feeding back into the market on the day to day. And obviously, marketing plays a part in that competitive intelligence capture. So I see a lot of failure points when marketing is not aligned with their peers in the revenue trifecta or with RevOps. And then, if you think too about the heartbeat of an organization is its employees, and the job of a head of people or a VP of people, of HR is kind of a more traditional term, is integral to brand because the marketing leader and the head of HR need to really work on how you train the employee to live the values, live the narrative, embody the elevator pitch in a way that doesn't just show up how they interact with each other, but how they talk about you to the market as well as how they do their jobs every day. And that ends up showing up in things like how you build product and all sorts of important things for the go-to-market life cycle too. So that would probably be my final thought.
yet another couple great topics for another show. And Alan, it has been such a pleasure spending time with you this morning. Thank you so much for your appearance on StrategyCast.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on today's show. We hope your strategic brains are spinning with new ideas and bold inspiration that will elevate your strategies and marketing know-how.